The sundial sits 43 miles past Holbrook, where the two-lane highway forgets its own name, and the cell phone signal dies like something thirsty. I took the night bartender position on a Tuesday in late July, which should tell you everything about the state of my life at the time. Phoenix had chewed me up. Overdue rent, a car repossession, collection calls that sang through my voicemail like a choir of small, persistent demons. My mother stopped returning my texts somewhere around the third month. When you're 28 and sleeping on a friend's couch, you stop being particular about your options. Lou Salgado conducted my interview in the parking lot, standing beside 4 ancient gas pumps that looked like they'd been salvaged from a museum of American optimism. He was 60-something, copper-skinned, with hands that had forgotten how to stay still. The Roadhouse behind him was a low squat of adobe and corrugated tin, the kind of place that looked like it had grown out of the desert, rather than been built on it. A neon saguaro cactus flickered above the door, pink and green, struggling against the afternoon glare. You pour drinks, you keep the peace. You lock up at 1:40 and you're out at 2, Lou said, not looking at me, watching the heat shimmer on the asphalt instead. Tips are yours, registers mine, and anything weird gets reported but not investigated. Understand? I said I understood, though I didn't. Not really. He handed me 2 keys on a brass ring, a grease-stained tips ledger, and a laminated card that had been handled so many times the edges had gone soft. House Rules Nights was printed across the top in faded red marker. I read them standing there in the sun. If the neon saguaro flickers 3 times in a row, kill the jukebox and lower your eyes. Do not fill the 5th bar stool from the left after 11:11 p.m. If someone sits there, take their order without looking up, and charge exact cash. If the mirror shows more people than the room, count bottles, not faces. When the dinner bell rings after 1:30 a.m., do not answer the back door. If coyotes fall silent, nobody crosses the parking lot till the wind returns. I looked up at Lou, waiting for the punchline. He was already walking back inside. Those for real. I called after him. He paused at the door, one hand on the frame. Night shift's different out here. Desert's got its own traffic patterns. You follow the rules, you'll be fine. He disappeared into the dim interior, and I was left standing there with a laminated card full of what sounded like creative writing. Exercises. I should have paid more attention to the way he'd said traffic. Patterns, like he was talking about something with intention, something that moved with purpose through the empty places. The interior of the sundial was exactly what you'd expect, and slightly worse. A long horseshoe bar of scarred mesquite, a wall of mirrors behind the bottles that made the small space feel infinite and slightly nauseating, a jukebox in the corner that only played vinyl, and a battered brass dinner bell nailed beside the back door like some kind of folk art installation. The floor was concrete, painted red decades ago, now worn to pink in the high traffic areas. 4 ceiling fans churned the air without cooling it. The smell was layered. Creosote and spilled whiskey and something older, like the building remembered when this land was ocean floor. My first shift started at 8 p.m. Lou showed me the register. The pour measurements, generous for Wells, conservative for Call brands, the credit card machine that worked maybe 60% of the time, and the lockbox under the bar where we kept the confrontational drunk money, meaning the cash we'd offer belligerent patrons to leave quietly, rather than call anyone who might take 45 minutes to arrive. Radio's there, he said, pointing to an old CB unit mounted near the cigarette display. Dispatch is Channel 9, but don't expect much. You're mostly on your own out here. What about the rules? I asked, tapping the laminated card I'd tucked into my back pocket. Lou was putting on his jacket, preparing to leave me alone for the next 6 hours. Folklore mostly, he said. But the night crew takes them seriously. Easier to follow them than argue about why you didn't. He paused at the door, silhouetted against the bruising sunset. Maya, they're not about believing. They're about behaving. There's a difference. Then he was gone. And I was alone with the bottles and the mirrors, and the rules I'd already decided were some kind of hazing ritual for new hires. The first customers arrived around 8:30, a couple in their 50s, sunburned and road-weary, who ordered 2 Coors Light and asked if we had Wi-Fi. I told them we had beer and a clean bathroom, and they seemed satisfied with that. By 9, a handful of truckers had settled into their regular positions at the bar. I could tell they were regulars by the way they sat, by the specific wear patterns on their chosen stools. They nodded at me, assessed me with the casual economy of men who spend their lives evaluating whether things will hold, and then largely ignored me. I fell into the rhythm easily enough. Pour, collect, wipe, repeat. The jukebox played country songs that all sounded like the same song about different kinds of leaving. The neon saguaro flickered occasionally, but never in the pattern specified in the rules. The dinner bell sat silent beside the back door. Outside, through the windows, I could see the desert darkening. The sky going from purple to black, stars emerging like holes punched through paper. Around 10:30, I caught myself looking at the fifth bar stool from the left. It sat empty, slightly more worn than the others, the vinyl patched with duct tape that had been there so long it had become part of the chair's character. I wondered who'd sat there, why it mattered. What could possibly happen if someone chose it after some arbitrary time? At 10:47, a woman with license plates from 3 states away asked me about the card in my pocket, the corner of which was visible. "House rules," I said, pulling it out. "New hire orientation materials." She read them, laughed. Very Twin Peaks, very authentic desert mystique. I laughed with her, poured her another gin and tonic, and filed the rules back in my pocket. At 11:03, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, all at once, like someone had opened a freezer door. The truckers noticed. One of them, a man named Dale with a CB handle embroidered on his jacket, looked at the door, then at me, then pulled his coffee closer. At 11:07, the neon saguaro flickered, once, twice. I was refilling the ice bin and didn't notice. The third flicker was longer, a sustained dimming that made everyone look up. I remembered the rule. "Kill the jukebox, lower your eyes." I laughed it off, didn't move, finished scooping ice. The jukebox hiccuped mid-song, skipped backward, then forward, then settled into playing normally. One of the truckers, Dale, caught my eye and shook his head just slightly. A warning, maybe, or disappointment. Nothing else happened. The night continued. By 1 a.m., the crowd had thinned to 3 regulars and a couple playing silent footsie at a back table. I started my closing routines, counting the register, wiping down surfaces, checking the bathrooms. At 1:38, I locked the front door. At 1:42, I killed the main lights, leaving only the bar lights and the neon. At 1:55, everyone was gone except me, and the hum of the coolers and the last flies of summer tapping against the windows. I stood behind the bar, looking at my reflection in the mirror wall. Just me, surrounded by bottles, looking tired and slightly drunk on the smell of spilled alcohol. The desert outside pressed against the windows like something curious. I drove home to the weekly rental room I'd found in Holbrook, 13 miles back toward civilization. The road was empty. The stars were aggressive in their brightness. I thought about rules and folklore, and the way Lou had said traffic patterns like he meant something alive. I thought I'd learn, given time, that the rules were metaphor, safety protocols translated into creative language to make them memorable. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost everything. By Friday, I'd started to relax into the job. The sundial had a rhythm, a pulse that synced with the highway traffic and the heat. Early evening was quiet. Couples, tourists, people using the bathroom and buying a single beer out of politeness. The real crowd arrived between 9 and midnight. Truckers on the Albuquerque Flagstaff corridor, shift workers from the mining operations north of Winslow, locals who wanted to drink somewhere they wouldn't run into their ex-wife's cousin. I'd learned names, drink preferences, the art of pouring heavy enough to earn tips, but light enough that Lou wouldn't notice the inventory discrepancies. I'd learned that the credit card machine worked better if you hit it on the left side first. I'd learned that the bathroom plunger was kept in the storage closet, not under the sink, and that the jukebox sometimes ate quarters on Tuesdays. I'd also learned that several of the regulars kept a copy of the house rules in their wallets. Dale, the trucker with the embroidered jacket, had shown me his on Wednesday night. His was older than mine, printed on cardstock instead of laminated, with 2 additional rules written in ballpoint on the back. If someone asks for directions to a place that doesn't exist, give them directions anyway. North is always safe. Don't take your tips from the rail after 1 a.m. Wait till morning. Lou changed the rules? I'd asked. Dale shrugged. Lou didn't write them. Rules have been here longer than the building, near as I can tell. Each tender adds what they learn. I'd wanted to ask more, but a fight had broken out near the jukebox. More of a loud disagreement, really, about whether Waylon or Willie was the better outlaw, and by the time I'd mediated and poured reconciliation shots, Dale had left for his overnight haul. Friday night started normally. By 10 p.m. the bar was pleasantly full, maybe 15 people scattered between stools and tables. The jukebox was playing Marty Robbins' El Paso, the long version that tells the whole story of love and murder and dying in the desert. The neon saguaro hummed and flickered its usual irregular rhythm. Outside, the temperature had dropped to something almost bearable, and people had propped the door open to let the night air circulate. At 10:54, the jukebox did something strange. The song ended, and instead of the mechanical silence between tracks, there was a sound like breathing, like the machine was considering its options. Then it dropped another record, same song El Paso starting over. Two of the regulars exchanged glances. At 10:56, the neon saguaro flickered. Once a brief dimming. At 10:58, it flickered again, longer this time. At 11:02, the third flicker arrived, a sustained brownout that made everyone visible in the mirror wall look like photographs from another era. Overexposed and slightly unreal, I remembered the rule: kill the jukebox and lower your eyes. My hand was already moving toward the jukebox power, muscle memory from reading the card 100 times, when I stopped myself. This was ridiculous. This was theater. This was... The jukebox stopped on its own, mid-word. Marty Robbins dying in the desert with his Rose's name on his lips. The silence was profound. I lowered my eyes, looking at the bar surface, the drip mats, the grain of the wood. I heard the door close. I heard boot heels on concrete, deliberate and slow. I heard someone settle onto a bar stool, the vinyl creaking under weight. When I looked up, a man was sitting on the fifth bar stool from the left. I checked my watch. 11:13 p.m. He was wearing a hat, brown felt, wide-brimmed in the old style. That's the first thing I noticed. The hat, and the way the brim threw a shadow that seemed too dark for the lighting in the room. I couldn't see his face. Not that it was hidden exactly, but my eyes wouldn't focus on it. The shadow from the brim extended down past where shadows should stop, eating his features, creating a blank space where a face should be. Rule 2 surfaced in my mind with sudden clarity. Do not fill the fifth bar stool from the left after 11:11 p.m. If someone sits there, take their order without looking up and charge exact cash. My throat had gone dry. Around the room, conversation had dropped to murmurs. The other patrons were very carefully not looking at the man on the fifth stool. I forced myself to approach, keeping my eyes on the drip mat in front of him, not allowing my gaze to rise to where his face should be. What can I get you? My voice sounded normal, which seemed like an accomplishment. Water. His voice was dry, textured like wind over sand, in a short glass, small, such a specific word. As if the size mattered, as if he was measuring something, rationing something. I poured water from the tap into a rocks glass, filling it only halfway. My hands didn't shake, which surprised me. I set it on the drip mat in front of him, still not looking up. $4, I said, which was absurd. We didn't charge for water. But the rule said exact cash, and my mouth was following protocols I didn't understand. He placed money on the bar. I looked at it peripherally. 3 bills, crisp and old-fashioned, the paper thick, the printing slightly off, and 1 coin, silver, larger than a quarter, with a date I couldn't quite read, and a woman's profile that didn't look like any currency I recognized. I swept the money into my hand and put it in the register, except for the coin, which I slipped into my pocket. It was warm, like it had been held in a hand for a long time, like it remembered body heat from decades ago. The man on the fifth stool lifted the glass. I heard him drink 3 small swallows, precise. He set the glass down. It was empty, though I would have sworn I'd heard only 3 small sips. "Thank you," he said, and his voice had a quality of distance to it, like he was speaking from the far end of a very long hallway. I nodded, still looking down. When I turned to put the glass in the wash basin, I caught sight of the mirror wall behind the bottles. I started counting without thinking, the way you count stairs in a dark house automatically. A baseline safety check. 1 customer at table 6, 2 at table 3, 3 at the bar left side, 2 at the bar right side, Dale standing by the jukebox. Woman in the denim jacket near the bathroom. Man at the far table, couple near the door, 11 people. I counted again slower, using the mirror. 12. There was someone in the mirror who wasn't in the room. A figure standing near the back hallway, half visible, like they were emerging from the wall itself. I couldn't make out details, gender, age, clothing, just the sense of a presence watching. Waiting, Rule 3 crashed through my mind. If the mirror shows more people than the room, count bottles, not faces. I turned deliberately to the bottle display. Top shelf, left to right, Patron, Don Julio, Herradura. Second shelf, Maker's Mark, Bullet Rye, Woodford Reserve, Jim Beam. Third shelf, Tanqueray, Bombay, Sapphire, Hendricks, Gordon's. Fourth shelf, House Vodka, House Rum, House Tequila. I counted every bottle, saying the names in my head like a prayer, like a spell, like something that would anchor me to the real and accountable world. When I finished, 37 bottles, I'd counted them twice. I turned back to the bar. The fifth stool was empty. The glass was gone. The drip mat was dry. Around the room, conversation resumed at normal volume, like someone had turned a dial. The jukebox clicked and hummed and began playing again. A different song, something by Johnny Cash about trains and time. Dale caught my eye from across the room and nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement. "You did okay," the nod said. "You followed the rules." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the coin. It was still warm, impossibly warm, and when I looked at the date, I could finally read it. 1887. The woman's profile was Lady Liberty, but her eyes were wrong, too large, too knowing. The coin itself felt heavy, denser than silver should be, like it was made of something that didn't properly exist. I put it back in my pocket. For the rest of the shift, I kept checking the mirror, counting bodies, counting bottles. The numbers matched. The room stayed solid. The neon saguaro flickered only occasionally, never in that pattern of 3. At 2 a.m., I locked the doors and counted the register. The bills the man had left were there, tucked between 20s, looking antique and official. I left them in the drawer for Lou to find. Driving home, I kept the coin in my cup holder, watching it in my peripheral vision. It sat there warm and heavy, and I tried to convince myself it was just silver, just old currency, just something explainable. But I'd seen his shadow-eaten face. I'd counted the bodies in the mirror. I'd heard the jukebox breathe. The rules weren't metaphor. They were instructions for surviving something that had learned to pass as normal, something that could sit at a bar and order water small and pay with money. From a century that was still making change for the living, I added the coin to the jar on my nightstand, where I kept buttons and paper clips and other small things without purpose. It was warm all night, like a heart that wouldn't stop beating. Rafe showed up on a Tuesday, guitar case on his back, charm on his sleeve. He was maybe 30, all lanky confidence and deliberate stubble, wearing boots that had seen actual miles and a smile that assumed welcome. Lou had mentioned him in passing, musician passing through. Plays sets sometimes, doesn't drink much. Tips okay. The kind of non-warning that I'd learned meant pay attention without seeming to. He set up in the corner near the jukebox, a small amplifier and a microphone stand that looked older than both of us. His first set was competent country folk, covers of covers, songs about highways and heartbreak, performed with just enough originality to avoid being boring. By his second night, I'd learned he was touring in the loosest sense, driving between small venues, roadhouses, brewery patios, anywhere that would let him play for tips and maybe a meal. The circuit, he called it, like it was a real thing with infrastructure and booking agents, not just a series of increasingly desperate phone calls to bars that might need someone to fill empty Friday nights. He was good company, though. Between sets, he'd sit at the bar, never the fifth stool, I noticed, like even he had some instincts about that, and talk about music theory or road stories, or the specific flavor of loneliness that comes from performing for strangers who aren't really listening. On Thursday, a week after the incident with the fifth stool, I showed him the rules card. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted someone to validate the absurdity, to laugh with me at the elaborate hazing, to confirm that nothing I'd experienced was worth taking seriously. He read them carefully, lips moving slightly, then handed the card back. "Dessert mystique," he said, using almost the same words the tourist had used. "Every isolated place has these. Rituals that make randomness feel manageable." He sipped his ginger ale, He really didn't drink, which I respected. It's housekeeping theater. Folk psychology. The neon flickers because it's old, so you create a rule that makes the flicker feel intentional, controlled. And the fifth bar stool? I asked. He shrugged. Broken spring, weird draft, who knows? But if you tell people not to sit there after 11:11, you create mystery. Mystery creates atmosphere. Atmosphere creates tips and repeat customers. Lou's running a business, not a haunted house. I wanted to tell him about the man with the shadow-eaten face, about the warm coin from 1887, about counting bodies that didn't match the room. But in the afternoon light, with the door propped open and classic rock playing on the jukebox and Rafe's reasonable smile, it all seemed distant, negotiable, possibly imagined. Makes sense, I said instead, and almost believed it. That night, Friday, the crowd built early. By 10 p.m. we were at capacity, maybe 25 people in a space meant for 20. Rafe played a longer set, feeding off the energy, taking requests and turning them into something halfway original. The tips jar by his amp was filling with bills and coins and the occasional phone number on a napkin. At 11:47, the coyotes started up outside. You could hear them through the walls, through the open door, a chorus of yips and howls that sounded like laughter, like gossip, like something being chased or something doing the chasing. Then at 11:51 they stopped. Not gradually, not winding down. They just cut off mid-howl all at once, like someone had thrown a switch, I noticed. Two of the regulars noticed. Dale, sitting at his usual spot, set down his beer very carefully and looked at the door. The wind died. The sound of the highway disappeared. The air went flat and still, pressure building like before a storm that wouldn't break. Rule 5 surfaced in my mind. If coyotes fall silent, nobody crosses the parking lot till the wind returns. I scanned the room, counting who might try to leave in the next few minutes. The couple near the back looked ready to cash out. A trucker I didn't recognize was putting on his jacket. Rafe, finishing his set, noticed the sudden quiet. He unplugged his guitar, set it on the stand, and walked over to the bar with that loose, confident stride that said he'd never encountered a space that didn't welcome him. "Weird vibe out there, huh?" he said, pointing toward the door with his chin. "Don't go outside yet," I said, keeping my voice low. He raised an eyebrow. "One of your rules?" Coyotes went quiet. "Wait for the wind." He laughed, not meanly, but with the full confidence of someone who'd never had to take folklore seriously. "The desert's a mirror, Maya. People see what they bring." Before I could respond, the dinner bell rang, one clean peal, bright and insistent, like someone announcing dinner at a farmhouse, like something calling you home. Everyone in the bar looked toward the back door. The bell hung there, brass and old, motionless now, but I'd heard it ring. We'd all heard it ring. I checked my watch. 11:54 p.m. Rule 4. When the dinner bell rings after 1:30 a.m., do not answer the back door. It wasn't 1:30 yet. The rule didn't technically apply. But the bell had rung and the coyotes were silent. And the wind had died. And Rafe was already walking toward the back hallway with his drummer's swagger, pulling a stick from his back pocket. Probably just wind, he said, though there was no wind. Or the building settling. Or he reached up and flicked the bell clapper with the drumstick, a quick, casual motion testing the sound. The bell rang by itself. Not from his touch, but a second after, like it was answering, like it was pleased to be acknowledged. The sound hummed through the bottles behind the bar, making them vibrate in their rows, creating harmonics that shouldn't have been possible. Rafe's smile flickered. He looked at the bell, then at me, then back at the bell. "Don't," I said. "Don't what?" He was trying to maintain the casual tone, but I could hear the edge creeping in. "Don't open the door. It's just a door, Maya." "Then why do you look scared?" That landed. He stiffened, pride engaging, and before I could move from behind the bar, he'd grabbed the handle and pulled the door open a crack. Cold air rolled in. Wrong cold, winter cold, impossible cold for August in Arizona. It carried a smell, not rot, nothing that obvious, but something old, something that had been waiting a long time to be acknowledged. Rafe slammed the door shut. His hand stayed on the handle, knuckles white. "What the fuck was that?" he said quietly. I didn't answer. Under the door, in the gap where light should spill out into the storage area, a shadow moved. Not the shadow of a person walking past, but something formless, something that changed shape, pacing, testing the threshold, looking for an invitation that hadn't quite been given. For 30 minutes, that shadow moved under the door. Rafe stood there, frozen, watching it. The rest of the bar had gone carefully quiet, conversations muted, everyone pretending not to notice the musician trapped in the back hallway by something that shouldn't exist. At 12:24 a.m., the wind returned. You could hear it suddenly, rushing across the parking lot, rattling the gas pumps, pushing hot August air back into its proper place. The coyotes started up again, distant now, moving away. The shadow under the door stilled, condensed, and disappeared. Rafe stepped away from the door like he'd been released from a spell. His face had gone pale under the permanent tan. He walked back to the bar, picked up his ginger ale with a shaking hand, and drank the whole thing in 3 long swallows. "Housekeeping theatre," I said gently. He didn't laugh. His second set started 15 minutes late and played short. His fingers landed a hair off beat, like he was performing for a room that had too many listeners, like he couldn't quite trust the space anymore. Between songs, he kept gold copy deep research, continue pleasancing at the back door, at the bell, at the windows showing the dark parking lot. When he packed up at 1:30, he moved quickly, efficiently, none of the usual lingering. He left a 20 in the tips jar on the bar, too much for 3 ginger ales, and paused at the front door. "The rules," he said, not looking at me. "They're not suggestions." "No," I agreed. "What's out there?" "I don't know. Something that pays attention when you break the rules." He nodded slowly, guitar case heavy on his shoulder. "I'm playing Winslow tomorrow, then Flagstaff, then maybe California." He said it like a plan, like an escape route, like someone mapping the quickest way off a sinking ship, but he'd be back. I could see it in the way he looked at the bar, at the mirrors, at the dinner bell. He'd be back because now he knew the rules weren't theatre, and he'd need to understand what he'd touched, what had touched him back. After he left, I checked the back door. The handle was cold, metal holding temperature it shouldn't have. I locked it, tested it twice, and made a note in the tips ledger. Bell rang before 1:30, Rafe opened door. Shadow underneath for 30 mins until wind returned. Lou would see it in the morning. Lou would nod and say nothing and probably be unsurprised. I drove home at 2:17 a.m., watching the rearview mirror more than the road ahead, half expecting to see headlights that didn't belong, shadows that moved wrong. The desert on either side of the highway was vast and dark and indifferent, and for the first time, I understood that indifference wasn't the same as empty. The rules weren't protection from the desert. They were negotiation with it, terms of a contract that had been signed long before I arrived, written in a language of bells and silence and things that could stand under a door and wait. Sunday was my day off, which I usually spent sleeping until noon, doing laundry at the coin-op in Holbrook, and trying not to think about how I'd ended up in a weekly rental with wall paneling from 1974 and a kitchenette that smelled like 40 years of microwave popcorn. But after Friday night, after Rafe and the bell and the shadow that moved like it was looking for something, I couldn't settle. By 10 a.m., I was dressed. By 10:30, I was driving back to the sundial. Lou's truck was in the lot. I found him in the storage room behind the bar, doing inventory with the kind of methodical attention that suggested he was avoiding something else. He looked up when I came in, unsurprised, like he'd been expecting me. "You work tonight?" he asked. "No, tomorrow. I just wanted to check some things." He studied me for a moment, then nodded toward the office. "Notebooks are in the file cabinet, bottom drawer. They go back about 15 years, far as I know." "Notebooks?" "Every bartender keeps notes. Incidents, patterns, additions to the rules." He returned to his clipboard. "You're not the first person who needed to know this is real." The office was barely larger than a closet. A metal desk, a filing cabinet, a chair with a cracked vinyl seat, and a calendar from 2 years ago still hanging on the wall. The file cabinet's bottom drawer stuck, then gave way with a shriek of metal on metal. Inside were spiral notebooks, the cheap kind you buy at grocery stores. Maybe a dozen of them, stacked and labeled with years and names. I pulled them out and spread them on the desk. The oldest was from 2008, the handwriting neat and feminine. Sarah Chen, night manager. The most recent was from 6 months ago. Deshaun Morris, bartender. In between were names I didn't recognize, shifts and seasons documented in ballpoint and pencil, and occasionally Sharpie. I started with Sarah's notebook. The first 20 pages were normal. Tabs, inventory notes, reminders about which regulars were cut off for the month. Then, around page 30, the margins started filling with different kinds of notes. Neon flickered 3x at 10:47, killed jukebox. Man at bar spoke in language I didn't recognize, left silver dollar from 1889. Mirror count 8 in room, 9 in reflection. Counted bottles until numbers matched. Extra figure stood near restroom for approx 12 mins. Coyotes cut off 11:43 p.m. Held 3 customers inside until midnight. They complained but stayed. Wind returned 12:02, very strong. The notes continued. Systematic observations written in the same tone someone might use to record temperature readings or traffic patterns. Sarah had been studying the phenomena, documenting them, looking for patterns in the wrongness. On page 63, she'd started listing practical warnings. If patron asks for water small, always charge cash. They pay exact. Silver older than 1912 goes in coffee can in freezer. Mirror is an entrance. Don't count faces or you'll start recognizing them. Count bottles instead. Bottles don't change. Dust devil spinning counterclockwise means something's crossing over. Stack coasters. Stay quiet until it passes. Speaking invites attention. I flipped through the other notebooks. Each bartender had their own section of observations, their own additions to the collective knowledge. From Marcus Yates, 2011, if you hear tires on gravel but the lot is empty, stay behind the rail. Something's arriving that doesn't use doors. From Jessica Cordova, 2014, don't take silver older than 1912 to the bank. Put it in the coffee can. One bartender tried depositing it. Register wouldn't balance for 3 months. Coins kept returning. From Tomas Herrera, 2016. When road is empty but you hear engine sounds, check the mirror. If you see headlights behind the bottles, they're on their way. Not here yet, but coming. And this from Deshaun Morris just 6 months ago. The rules aren't for a haunting. They're traffic laws. The bar sits on a crossing. The desert presses against the glass, against the mirrors, trying to come through. Rules teach you how to manage the border without opening it wider. One page caught my attention. A list of names with years next to them. Several crossed out. Martin Price, 1991. Opened on the Bella Elena Vasquez, 2003. Counted faces instead of bottles. Followed one home Randall Cross, 2009. Gave directions to something that asked Jeremy Ford. 2017, answered backdoor after 1:30. The crossed-out names had a note at the bottom. Didn't return for their next shift. Lou says some people just quit, but their keys were always left behind. Usually on the 5th bar stool. I sat back. The notebook spread around me like evidence of a crime that kept happening in slow motion, one shift at a time. The rules weren't folklore or hazing or clever marketing. They were a survival manual, written collaboratively by people who'd seen what I'd seen, who'd counted the wrong number of bodies in the mirror, who'd heard the bell ring when no one was pulling the rope. The bar wasn't haunted. It was positioned on something. A crossing, a thin place, a point where the desert's attention focused like light through a lens. And the rules were how you survived that attention, without feeding it, without giving it enough invitation to fully arrive. I found a blank notebook in the desk drawer, dated it, wrote my name on the inside cover, Maya Cortez. Bartender, July. I left the end date blank. I wasn't sure how long I'd last. On the first page, I started my own observations, adding to the collective record. August 2nd, 11:13 p.m. Man on 5th stool after 11:11, shadow-eaten face. Ordered water small. Paid with bills and 1887 silver dollar. Coin stayed warm all night. Mirror showed 12 people, room had 11. Counted bottles until extra figure disappeared. August 9th, 11:51 p.m. Coyotes fell silent. Wind died. Dinner bell rang at 11:54 before 1:30 rule applies. Rafe opened back door against warning. Cold air, wrong season. Shadow moved under door for 30 minutes until wind returned at 12:24. Lou appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. Find what you needed? How long has this been happening? Longer than the notebooks. Longer than me. This building's the 3rd structure on this site. There was a trading post before, and before that, a way station. Always the same reports. Mirrors showing too much, bells ringing themselves, something patient waiting just outside the rules. Why here? He shrugged. Why anywhere? Desert's old. Older than cities, older than highways, older than the idea that land belongs to people instead of the other way around. Some places are thin. The border between what is and what wants to be gets negotiable. You build on those places, you better learn the terms. And the bartenders who disappeared? They broke rules. Or maybe they just got tired of following them. He pushed off the doorframe. You can quit, Maya, no shame in it. Most people last 2-3 months once they really see it. Once it stops being theoretical. I looked at the notebooks, at the accumulated wisdom of people who'd stood behind the same bar, poured from the same bottles, watched the same mirrors. What happens if nobody tends the bar? If everyone quits? Don't know. Never been empty long enough to find out. Lou said something. He paused, corrected himself. For my grandfather, original Lou, used to say the rules keep it negotiated. Break them all, ignore them completely, and the crossing opens wider. Then it's not just bartenders dealing with it. The implication hung in the air. Whatever waited in the mirrors, whatever rang the bell, whatever paid with coins from dead years. The rules kept it local, contained, manageable. Stop following them, and the phenomena might spread, might find other doors, other mirrors, other people less prepared. I'm working tomorrow night, I said. Closing the notebook, Lou nodded, approving. Add what you learn. Next person will need it. I left the notebooks in the cabinet, but I took photographs of the key pages with my phone. Sarah's warnings, Marcus's observations, Deshawn's theory about crossings. I'd study them, memorize them, add them to the rules I'd already internalized. Driving back to Holbrook, I thought about borders and negotiations, about how every culture develops rules for threshold spaces, how to enter a house, how to greet a stranger, what to do at a crossroads. The sundial was a permanent crossroads, a place where two kinds of geography overlapped, and the rules were how you walked that line without falling through. The coin from the man with the shadow face sat on my nightstand, still warm. I'd started keeping it separate from other metal. It made keys go cold, made quarters tarnish faster, like it was too real, too densely itself. And regular matter couldn't tolerate the proximity. I added a note to my phone. Silver from patrons goes in freezer can. Don't mix with regular money. Check with Lou about history. Why freezer? Does cold contain it? The questions were accumulating faster than answers, but that was okay. I wasn't trying to understand everything. I was trying to survive my shifts, serve my customers, and keep the border between worlds exactly where it had been for the last 100 years. One night at a time, one rule at a time, one notebook entry at a time, adding to the record. Alma Encinas arrived during my Tuesday night shift, sliding into her corner table without fanfare or greeting. I hadn't seen her before, but the regulars acknowledged her with nods, with the kind of deference you give to someone who's earned respect through means you don't question. She was maybe 70, maybe older, the kind of age the desert gives you, where sun and work have worn away anything soft, leaving only the essential structure. She wore a denim shirt with pearl snaps, jeans that had been mended more than once, and boots that looked like they'd walked through decades without complaint. Her hands were scarred, the thick rope burn scarring that comes from working with large animals and failing to let go fast enough. Her eyes were the color of sunset. Not poetic sunset, but actual end-of-day light when the sky bruises orange and red before going dark. She ordered coffee, black, and lime wedges on the side. Specific, particular, not interested in conversation. I'd learned not to push. The regulars at the sundial talked when they wanted to talk, and silence was its own form of communication. Around 10 p.m., I was wiping down the bar when I felt her watching me. I looked up. She was holding the laminated rules card. I must have left it on the bar when I'd been showing it to a curious tourist earlier. Alma studied it like she was reading something familiar, something she'd memorized long ago. She caught my eye and nodded once, a gesture of approval. I walked over to her table, coffee pot in hand. Need a refill? Need you to sit for a minute, she said. Her voice was rough, textured like wind over stone. If the bar can spare you. It was a slow night. 6 people scattered across stools and tables, everyone settled and content. I poured her coffee, grabbed a club soda for myself and sat across from her. She tapped the rules card. You're following them. Trying to. Good. Most people fight it at first. Think they're too smart, too rational, too modern for folk rules. She sipped her coffee. Those people don't last. You've been coming here a long time? 30 years, near enough. Used to work cattle on the reservations, then ranch management. Then I retired to not dying and drinking coffee in places that know how to pour it. She squeezed lime into her cup. An odd addition, but the sharp citrus smell cut through the coffee bitterness in a way that somehow worked. I was here when Elena Vasquez was tending bar. Watched her stop counting bottles and start counting faces, the name from the notebook. Elena Vasquez, 2003. Counted faces instead of bottles, followed one home. What happened to her? I asked. She started recognizing the extra faces in the mirror, started seeing them as people, individuals, folks she might know. Alma's eyes went distant. One night she saw her mother, who'd been dead 6 years, standing in the mirror behind the bottles. She went to the glass, put her hand on it. Next shift, she didn't show. Never did again. They found her car parked outside her apartment, keys in the ignition, engine running. Door to her place was open. She wasn't inside. The coffee suddenly tasted like metal. Where did she go? Where things in the mirror go when they're done pretending to be reflections. Alma met my eyes. The desert don't hunt you, Maya. It asks for you, polite-like. The rules teach you to underpay its attention, to not give it enough of yourself to pull you through. I thought about the man on the 5th stool, about the shadow face, about the way the mirror had shown someone standing where no one stood. Why does it ask? Why does anything want company? Why do people build houses in empty places, light fires, play music, talk into the dark? She shrugged. Loneliness maybe, or hunger, or something we don't have words for because we're not built to understand it. She pulled out a small notebook, not spiral-bound like the ones in Lou's office, but leather-covered, held together with a string. She opened it to a page marked with a dried flower and showed me 2 entries written in careful pencil. If the jukebox plays a song you didn't select, let it finish. Do not skip or pause. That's a fare being paid. Never give the desert a direction. If a stranger says, "Which way is home?" try to say, "Road runs both ways, lights in here." These aren't on Lou's card, I said. Lou's card is the basics. These are the advanced course. She closed the notebook. The jukebox one I learned in '98. Machines started playing songs nobody'd touched, old recordings, things that shouldn't have been in there. Bartender at the time kept unplugging it, kept trying to control it. One night the jukebox played for 3 hours straight. Same song. Some Spanish lullaby nobody recognized. When it finally stopped, the bartender was gone. Just vanished mid-shift, mid-pour. Glass of bourbon still on the bar, cigarette still burning in the ashtray. And the direction rule, that one's older. Came from a bartender in the 70s, near as I know. Someone walks in looking lost, asks which way is home. You do not tell them east, west, north, south. Because what's asking might not be what it looks like. And if you give the desert a direction, you've given it permission to move that way, to follow that path. She tapped the table. You say the road runs both ways. You say the light's inside. You invite them in, not out. In is safe, in is bounded. Out is where things wait. I added both rules to my phone, memorizing them. Why are you telling me this? Because you're still here. Because you're writing things down. Because you followed the rules when that musician tried to open the door, and you didn't let him pull you into his mistake. She finished her coffee, set the cup down with precision. And because the mirror's been showing you a lot lately, and you've been smart enough not to look too close, that landed like a punch. She was right. I'd started noticing the extra figures more often, started seeing them peripherally, shapes that didn't match the room. But I'd been following Deshawn's advice, counting bottles, focusing on concrete inventory, instead of impossible presences. How do you know what I've been seeing? Because I've been watching you watch them. And because I've been where you are, back when I was young enough to think I could understand it. She stood, leaving a $5 bill on the table. Too much for coffee, exactly right for the information. You're doing fine, Maya. Keep following the rules. Keep writing things down. And remember, the desert doesn't want to kill you. It wants you to join it. There's a difference. She walked out into the night, and I watched her climb into an old Ford pickup that looked like it had been assembled from other trucks, and pure determination. She drove off south toward the reservation, toward distances I couldn't imagine. I added her 2 rules to my notebook that night, along with the stories she'd told. Then I added something else, an observation I'd been avoiding. The extra figures in the mirror. I'm starting to recognize positions. One stands near the restroom. One stands at the end of the bar. One stands in the back hallway. They're not random. They're occupying specific spots, like they're waiting for someone to acknowledge them, to look directly at them, to invite them fully in. Don't look. Count bottles. Let them wait. For the rest of the night, I was hyper-aware of my peripheral vision, of the shapes that hovered at the edges of the mirror's reflection. They were patient. They'd been patient for decades, maybe longer. They could wait for someone to make a mistake, to count wrong, to look up at the exact wrong moment. I didn't give them that moment. At 2 a.m., I locked the doors and turned off the lights, and in the brief darkness before my eyes adjusted, I heard something in the back of the room shift, like someone changing position, settling in for another long wait. When I turned on the bar lights, the mirrors showed only empty room and bottles and the ordinary evidence of a night's work. But I knew they were there. And they knew I knew. The negotiation continued, civil and patient and absolutely unforgiving. The following Thursday was quiet in the way that makes you nervous. Too few customers, too much empty space for sound to travel, too much opportunity to notice things you'd rather ignore. By 1:30 a.m., everyone had cleared out except for Dale and another trucker comparing routes, and a young couple who'd been nursing beers and having the kind of whispered argument that meant they'd be broken up by New Mexico. I'd started the closing routines early, wiping down tables, checking bathrooms, restocking for Friday's crowd. The jukebox had gone silent around 1, and I hadn't bothered to feed it more quarters. The quiet felt deliberate, like the building was holding its breath. At 1:37 a.m., I locked the front door. Dale and his friend finished up and left through the side exit, waving without conversation. The couple finally left at 1:39, still not speaking to each other, probably headed for a long, silent drive toward separate futures. I was alone. The neon saguaro hummed and flickered, its usual rhythm, nothing alarming. The mirrors showed only me, only bottles, only the evidence of an ordinary Thursday night in an extraordinary place. I counted the register, balanced the credit card slips, wiped down the bar one final time. At 1:37 a.m., the dinner bell rang, one clean peal, bright and immediate and absolutely certain. I froze, hand on the bar towel, and checked my watch again, 1:37. The rule said don't answer after 1:30. The bell had rung exactly 7 minutes into the danger window. I looked at the back door. The bell hung motionless beside it, the brass catching light looking innocent and functional, and not at all like something that had just rung itself. Then I heard the knock. 2 taps, gentle, the kind of knock that meant someone familiar, someone welcome. And then a voice, "Mija, abre por favor." My mother's voice, exactly her cadence, exactly her particular mix of Spanish and English, exactly the way she used to. Knock on my bedroom door when I was a teenager, and she wanted to talk about my disappointing grades or my disappointing choices or my disappointing tendency to disappoint. Her, I hadn't heard that voice in months. Not since I'd left Phoenix, not since I'd stopped calling, not since the night I'd texted her asking for help with rent, and she'd responded with a Bible verse about earning your bread. "Mija, I know you're in there." "It's late." "Let me in," my throat closed. My hand moved toward the bar gate, toward the back hallway, toward the door. Pulled by muscle memory and guilt and the desperate, stupid hope that maybe she'd driven all the way out here. Maybe she'd come to apologize, maybe. The neon saguaro flickered. 3 times. The pattern from Rule 1, I stopped moving. Looked at the jukebox. It was already off, unplugged earlier. I lowered my eyes to the bar surface and counted my breathing instead of the voice. "Maya Pilar Cortez, you open this door right now." Full name. The tone she used when I was in trouble, when disappointment had crystallized into anger. The voice was perfect, identical, pulled from memory with impossible precision. I walked to the jukebox and made sure it was unplugged, hands shaking, giving myself action instead of reaction. Behind me, the knocking came again, more insistent. "I drove 4 hours to see you. You're going to leave me out here in the dark?" The neon flickered again, longer this time. In the mirror behind the bottles, I caught movement. Not in the room, not anywhere that existed, but in the reflection. A figure standing near the back hallway, waiting. I turned to the bottles and started counting out loud. Voice steady, despite everything. "Patron. Don Julio, Herradura, Maker's Mark, Bullet Rye, Woodford Reserve. Maya, what are you doing? I can hear you in there talking to yourself. Open the door. Jim Beam, Tanqueray, Bombay Sapphire. Hendricks. The voice changed. Just slightly. Just enough to notice. The words were right, but the spaces between them were wrong. The breathing underneath was off, like someone reading a script instead of speaking from familiarity. Please, Miha. It's cold out here. It was August. It was 90 degrees at midnight. Gordon's house vodka. House rum. House tequila. Outside, past the windows, I noticed something. The parking lot was empty, but there were no coyotes, no wind. The air had gone absolutely still, the way it had the night Rafe opened the door. On the bar near the back table, coasters started lifting slightly, stirred by something that wasn't wind. A dust devil forming, spinning counterclockwise. Alma's warning. Stack coasters, don't speak till it passes. I stopped counting bottles and moved to the coasters, gathering them from the table, stacking them with deliberate precision, one on top of another, building a small tower of cardboard, while my mother's voice continued behind me. Maya, baby, please. I came all this way. I'm sorry about before. I want to help. Just let me in. 10 coasters stacked. The voice was getting fainter, like it was being pulled away by something. Like its permission to speak was expiring. 15 coasters stacked. The neon steadied. 20 coasters stacked. The bell gave a small, frustrated ring, barely audible. At 23 coasters, everyone from the table, the wind returned. Sudden, rushing across the parking lot, hot August air pushing back into place. The coyotes started up distant and real. The figure in the mirror disappeared like someone had turned off a light. The voice outside stopped mid-sentence. Just want to see you. Silence. I stood there holding the stack of coasters, breathing hard, sweat running down my back despite the AC. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the stack. The back door was still closed. The bell hung motionless. Whatever had been wearing my mother's voice had given up. At least for tonight. At least until the next time I made myself vulnerable enough to hear it. I walked to the back door and checked the lock secure. I checked the bolt, engaged. I looked at the gap under the door and saw nothing. No shadow, no movement. No evidence that anything had been there at all. But I'd heard her voice. I'd heard it perfectly, exactly, impossibly. The jukebox clicked and hummed and began playing on its own. A Spanish lullaby, old and crackling, the kind of song my mother used to play when I was small. Alma's rule, let it finish. That's a fare being paid. I sat at the bar and listened to the entire song. 3 minutes and 47 seconds of childhood memory turned into bait, into test, into reminder that the desert knew everything you brought with you and would use it all to ask for entry. When the song ended, the jukebox shut off with a decisive click. I added to my notebook, August 15th, 1:37 a.m. Dinner bell rang after 1:30. Voice at back door using my mother's exact speech pattern, inflection, words. Neon flickered, rule 1. Counted bottles. Voice became imperfect, too precise, wrong breathing. Coasters lifted. Counterclockwise devil. Stacked 23 coasters, stayed silent. Wind returned, voice stopped. Jukebox played lullaby unprompted. Let it finish, Alma's rule. Fare paid. Door stayed closed. Note. The desert doesn't just know what you're afraid of. It knows what you miss, what you want, what you regret. It will wear the voices of people you love and use them to ask for permission. Don't give it. Count bottles instead. I locked up at 2:14 a.m., checked every door twice, and drove home watching the rearview mirror for headlights that might not have engines, listening to the radio to drown out any voice that might try to follow me home. My mother hadn't called in months. I'd stopped expecting her to, but the desert knew I'd still answer if she knocked. Saturday night built like a storm, pressure increasing through the evening until the air felt thick enough to chew. By 9 p.m. we were packed, maybe 30 people in a space that felt crowded at 25. A touring bus had stopped, Harley riders on a desert circuit, locals celebrating someone's birthday and the usual trucker rotation. Rafe was back, playing a longer set, his confidence partially restored, though he still avoided the back hallway and kept glancing at the dinner bell like it might attack him. The crowd was good-natured. Tips were flowing, and I was running on pure adrenaline and coffee, moving through the routine with the efficiency that comes from repetition. Pour, collect, wipe, repeat. The jukebox stayed cooperative. The neon flickered, but never in that pattern of 3, and the mirrors showed only the number of people actually present. It felt almost normal, which should have been my first warning. At 11:08 p.m., headlights swept across the front windows. Everyone looked up. It's instinct when you're in a roadhouse, that automatic assessment of who's arriving, whether they're local or trouble or both. But the lights moved wrong. They glided into the parking lot slowly, smoothly, with no accompanying engine sound, no crunch of gravel, no radio bleeding through open windows. The headlights turned and parked in a spot near the front door. They stayed on, high beams, bright enough to throw shadows through the windows. But there was no engine rumble, no door opening, no footsteps approaching. I watched the door waiting for someone to enter. 30 seconds passed. A minute, nobody came in. At 11:11 p.m., the neon saguaro began to flicker. Once, twice. The third time was long, sustained, the light browning out until the pink and green went muddy and dim. Rule 1. Kill the jukebox and lower your eyes. I moved toward the jukebox. But before I could reach it, someone sat down on the 5th bar stool from the left. I didn't see him arrive. One moment the stool was empty. The next moment a man was sitting there wearing a black duster coat that belonged to a different century, a hat that threw shadows deeper than geometry allowed. I couldn't see his face. Didn't want to. Rule 2. Do not fill the 5th bar stool from the left after 11:11 p.m. If someone sits there, take their order without looking up and charge exact cash. The room had gone quiet. Not silent, the crowd was still there. Still breathing, still real, but muted. Like someone had wrapped the whole building in cotton. I approached the 5th stool without raising my eyes, focusing on the drip mat, the worn wood, the ordinary details that proved the world was still solid. What can I get you? Water. The voice was dry, distant, small. I poured water into a rocks glass, half full, hand steady. Set it on the drip mat without looking up. $4, he placed money on the bar. 3 bills, old paper and 1 coin that felt warm even before I touched it. Another silver dollar from a year that shouldn't still be paying for drinks. I took the money, dropped the coin into my apron pocket, and stepped back. The man on the 5th stool drank. 3 small sips, ritual and precise. When I turned to put the glass in the wash basin, I made the mistake of glancing at the mirror. The room showed 32 people. I counted quickly, panic creeping in, scanning the actual bar and tables. 30 people in the room. 32 in the mirror. Rule 3. If the mirror shows more people than the room, count bottles, not faces. I turned to the bottle display and started counting, voice low but audible, anchoring myself to inventory. Patron Don Julio, Herradura. At 11:19 p.m., the coyotes outside cut off mid-howl. The wind died. The headlights in the parking lot were still on, still bright, still illuminating nothing. Dale caught my eye from his usual stool and gave me a look that said, "Hold steady. This is bad, but manageable." Alma was at her corner table. When had she arrived? And she was watching the windows, watching the mirror, watching me count bottles with my mother's prayer voice. At 11:24 p.m., the dinner bell rang twice. 2 bright, insistent peals that said company's here. Time to answer. Someone near the back of the room stood up, a tourist I didn't recognize, and started walking toward the back door like she'd been called personally. Rafe dropped his guitar pick, the sound impossibly loud in the muted room. "Sit down," Alma said, not loud but with absolute authority. The woman stopped, confused, like she'd been sleepwalking and just woke up. I was still counting bottles. Maker's Mark. Bullet Rye Woodford Reserve. Rafe moved toward the tourist woman, guided her back to her seat, whispered something that made her sit down heavily, shaking her head. The jukebox clicked on by itself and began playing. Not a song I recognized. Something older. Maybe a recording from the 40s or 50s. A woman singing in Spanish about roads that lead nowhere and homes that disappear when you turn around. Alma's rule. If the jukebox plays a song you didn't select, let it finish. That's a fare being paid. I let it play. Kept counting bottles. Finished the inventory and started over. Patron Don Julio Herradura. In the mirror, the 2 extra figures had become more distinct. One stood at the end of the bar where Elena Vasquez must have seen her dead mother. One stood in the back hallway near the door, waiting for someone to answer the bell. At the tables near the window, coasters started to lift, spinning slightly, stirred by something that wasn't wind because there was no wind, because the coyotes were silent and the air had gone dead and everything was waiting for someone to break a rule. to look up at the wrong face, to open the wrong door. I set down the bottle I was holding and moved to the tables, gathering coasters, stacking them methodically. 1, 2, 3. People watched me, confused but quiet, sensing that something was happening that required participation through silence. 4, 5, 6. The song on the jukebox droned on, the woman's voice singing about desert roads and lovers who promise to return but never do. 7, 8, 9. The figure in the mirror near the back hallway was moving closer to the glass, like it was trying to push through, like the barrier was negotiable if enough rules broke at once. 10, 11, 12. Behind me I heard someone gasp. I didn't turn around. Didn't stop stacking. 13, 14, 15. The headlights outside flickered. The neon saguaro dimmed further. At coaster number 19, Rafe's voice cut through the quiet. "Maya, the back door." "Don't," Alma said sharply. "Let her work." 20, 21. The dinner bell rang again, a third time, frustrated, demanding. 22, 23. My hands were shaking. The song on the jukebox was winding down, the woman's voice fading like she was walking away into distance. 24, 25, 26. The song ended. Clean, decisive, final. The needle lifted, clicked, settled. The wind returned, sudden, violent, rattling the windows, pushing hot August air back into reality. The coyotes started up, ragged and immediate and blessedly real. The neon saguaro steadied, glowing pink and green with renewed confidence. The headlights in the parking lot went dark. When I turned back to the bar, the fifth stool was empty. A glass lay shattered on the floor beside it, water spreading across the concrete. I hadn't heard it break. In the mirror, the room showed exactly 30 people. I counted bodies. 30 in the room, 30 in the glass. The extra figures had disappeared. The tourist woman was crying quietly, her partner holding her, both of them looking shaken in the way people do when they've brushed against something that shouldn't exist. Dale raised his beer to me. Silent salute. Alma nodded once, lips thin but approving. Rafe's face was pale, but he picked up his guitar and started playing again. Something upbeat and deliberately normal, trying to pull the room back toward ordinary Saturday night energy. I cleaned up the broken glass, hands still shaking, and found the coin in my apron pocket. It was frosted ice cold despite the heat. The date reading 1889, Lady Liberty's profile looking knowing and slightly sad. I took it to the back and dropped it into the coffee can in the freezer, where it joined maybe a dozen others. Silver coins from dead years, payment for water small, currency from a place that pressed up against the bar and asked politely for entrance. Lou arrived at 1:30 a.m. to help close out the big night. He saw my face, saw the broken glass in the trash, saw the stack of coasters still sitting on the table. "Bad one?" he asked. "Everything at once," I said. He nodded like he'd expected this. "Happens sometimes, saturation. Too many people, too much attention, too much opportunity for something to slip through." He counted the register while I wiped down the bar one final time. "You held it." "Barely. But you held it." He looked at me directly, something he rarely did. "That's what matters. The rules work if you follow them all, even when they come at you together. Especially then. After everyone left and the doors were locked and the night had finally, blessedly ended, I sat at the bar in the dim light and added to my notebook, August 17th, 11:08 p.m., 12:30 a.m. Everything triggered at once. Headlights with no engine. Neon flickered 3 times, Rule 1. Fifth stool filled at 11:11, Rule 2. Mirror showed +2 people, Rule 3. Coyotes went silent, Rule 5. Dinner bell rang 3 times after 1:30, Rule 4. Jukebox played unselected song, Alma's rule. Coasters lifted, counterclockwise devil, Alma's warning. Followed all rules simultaneously. Counted bottles, stacked 26 coasters, stayed silent, let song finish, didn't answer door, held customers inside. Wind returned, phenomena cleared. Glass broke at fifth stool, man disappeared. Silver coin 1889, frosted cold, put in freezer can. Note, the rules aren't separate. They're parts of one system. Break one and others will test. Follow them all and the border holds. This is traffic management, not haunting. The crossing has rules and you follow them, or you become part of what's crossing. I drove home at 2:47 a.m., exhausted and wired and fundamentally changed. I'd held the border through simultaneous breach attempts. I'd managed the crossing through the worst surge I'd experienced, and I'd proven to myself, to Alma, to whatever waited in the mirrors, that I understood the rules weren't folklore, they were survival. Sunday morning, Lou came in early. I was already there, sitting at the bar with coffee and my notebook, adding details I'd remembered after the adrenaline had worn off. He brought the register receipts, the tips ledger and the coffee can from the freezer. He set the can on the bar between us. 8 coins now, all silver, all frosted, all from years between 1887 and 1903. They clinked against each other with a sound that was wrong, too pure, too bell-like, like they were made of something more essential than regular silver. Deshawn tried to spend one of these once, Lou said, picking up an $1891. Took it to a coin dealer in Flagstaff. Dealer tested it, said it was genuine silver, right weight, right composition, but he wouldn't buy it. Said it made him uncomfortable. Said it felt like it was watching him. What do we do with them? Keep them frozen. Keep them separate from regular money. When the can gets full, he paused. When the can gets full, we bury it. Where? Doesn't matter. Long as it's deep and away from the building. The silver wants to return to whoever paid it. Freezing slows that down. Burying stops it completely, near as we can tell. He pulled out the laminated rules card, now worn soft from handling, and set it beside the coins. Then he produced a black Sharpie. You earned this, he said, offering me the marker. Add what you learned. I took the Sharpie, uncapped it, and on the back of the card, where there was still some white space, I wrote in careful block letters, if jukebox selects itself, let it finish. No skips. If the mirror shows you before you move, stare at labels, stack coasters, count to 10. Old silver goes to freezer can. Never bank it. If asked for directions home, don't give them. Say the road runs both ways. Lights in here. Lock the door at 1:40. What knocks after isn't what it sounds like. Lou read the additions, nodded and pulled out his own laminator, a small handheld unit he kept in the office for updating menus. He sealed the card, the new rules now permanent, part of the official record. You'll train the next person, he said. It wasn't a question. If there is one, there will be, always is. People need work, need distance, need a place where rules make sense even when nothing else does. He poured himself coffee. Most don't last. Most break a rule out of carelessness or skepticism or bad luck, and then they're gone or they quit or they just stop showing up. But some people like you, like Alma, like Sarah and Deshawn and the others who wrote notebooks, some people understand. The rules aren't restrictions. They're relationships. Relationships with what? With the desert. With whatever's old enough and patient enough to live in mirrors and ring bells and pay for water with money from dead years. He shrugged. Call it what you want. Ghosts, spirits, thin places, crossings. Names don't matter. The rules matter. The attention to detail matters. The willingness to count bottles instead of faces matters. Alma arrived around noon, unusual for her, and slid into her corner table. Lou brought her coffee without asking. She squeezed lime into it, that odd habit I'd grown used to, and beckoned me over. I sat. She pulled out her leather notebook and added something in pencil, then showed me. When everything happens at once, follow every rule at once. The crossing tests for weak points. Show none. She signed it with her X, then slid the notebook across the table. Your turn. I added an entry. The desert uses what you love against you. Voices, faces, memories. It asks permission by sounding like home. Don't give it. Home is inside, behind the bar, behind the rules. I signed my name and dated it. August 18th. Alma smiled. A rare expression that made her look decades younger. You'll do fine, Maya. You've got the temperament for this. Skeptical enough to test, smart enough to believe what you test. How long did you last? I asked. Before you stopped tending bar? 8 months. Winter of 1994. I followed the rules perfectly, every shift, no breaks. But one night I looked up at the wrong moment, just exhausted, just careless, and I saw my daughter in the mirror. She was 5 then, safe at home with her father, but there she was behind the bottles, reaching for me. Alma's eyes went distant. I didn't go to her, didn't touch the mirror, but I couldn't keep working after that. Couldn't risk it. Is your daughter? She's fine. Married, 2 kids, lives in Tucson. Safe because I didn't look twice. Didn't give the mirror permission to make her real. She finished her coffee. That's the thing, Maya. The desert doesn't want to hurt your people. It wants you to invite it to them, to give it direction, to open doors. You keep those doors closed, Everyone stays safe. You slip once and it follows you home. That night, Sunday, slow and quiet, I trained Tasha Pierce, a college kid from Winslow who needed weekend work. She was 20, bright-eyed, skeptical in the way young people are when they haven't learned that skepticism isn't armor. I showed her the register, the pour measurements, the credit card machine's peculiarities. Then I handed her the rules card. She read it, lips quirking into a smile. This is like desert aesthetic. Very horror ambiance? This is traffic management, I said, using Lou's language, Deshawn's theory. Follow them exactly. Don't test them. Don't assume they're metaphor. Okay, but realistically, no, I cut her off gently. No, realistically, just rules. You follow them or you don't work here. Your choice. Something in my tone landed. She looked at me, really looked, and saw whatever had changed in my face over the past 3 weeks. Saw that I wasn't joking, wasn't performing, wasn't engaging in cute onboarding theater. Okay, she said quietly. I'll follow them. At 11:11 p.m., she reached out to wipe down the 5th bar stool from the left. I gently moved her 1 stool over to the 6th. She glanced at me, questions forming, but she wiped the 6th stool instead. At 12:03 a.m., the jukebox ground up a song nobody had selected. Something from the 50s, an instrumental that sounded like wind and distance. Tasha's hand moved toward the skip button. I covered her hand, shook my head. She pulled back, and we listened to the whole song together. 3 minutes and 12 seconds of fare being paid to something that appreciated acknowledgement. At 1:29 a.m., the dinner bell gave one bright, eager ring. Tasha looked toward the back door. I pointed to the mirror and began counting bottles out loud, slow and clear. She watched me, confused but willing, and started counting with me. Patron Don Julio Herradura. By the time we reached House Vodka, the wind had returned outside. The coyotes argued the approaching dawn. The bell settled into silence. At 1:40 a.m., I locked the front door. Tasha watched me, learning the ritual, understanding that lock times weren't suggestions but boundaries that couldn't be negotiated. Did something happen? She asked. With the bell. Something wanted to happen. We didn't let it. By counting bottles? By following rules. By treating the closing shift like traffic through an intersection. Green light, red light, specific procedures to keep things moving safely. She nodded slowly, processing. What happens if you don't follow them? I thought about Elena Vasquez, about Martin Price, about Jeremy Ford, and all the names crossed out in the notebooks. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes you just get scared. Sometimes you don't come back for your next shift. And sometimes the desert gets permission to follow you home. We finished closing in silence. I showed her how to count the register, how to check the bathrooms one final time, how to do a last walk-through that verified every door was locked, every window secured, every threshold intact. At 2:03 a.m., we stood in the parking lot under impossible stars. The sundial behind us glowed faintly from the security lights, the neon saguaro dark, the building looking small and ordinary against the vast desert night. I'll see you next weekend, Tasha said, keys in hand, less confident than she'd been 6 hours ago, but steadier somehow. Weighted by new knowledge. Follow the rules, I said. Follow the rules, she echoed. I watched her drive away, taillights disappearing toward Holbrook, and I thought about tradition, about inherited knowledge, about how every culture develops protocols for managing dangerous borders and thin places. The sundial was our thin place. The rules were our protocol, and we'd keep following them, keep writing them down, keep training the next tender who showed up needing work and distance, and a place where impossible things happened according to specific, learnable patterns. Inside, in the office, the notebooks waited for the next entry. On the bar, the laminated card reflected security lights, the new rules permanent, the ink already fading slightly under handling. In the freezer, the coffee can held 8 silver coins from years when the West was younger and the desert hungrier. Each one a small negotiation, a price paid, a border held. Beyond the parking lot, a dust devil spun clockwise, harmless, ordinary, just wind being wind. The coyotes sang their usual arguments. The highway carried its sparse night traffic toward destinations that would arrive exactly as expected. Normal held, negotiated, patient, absolutely conditional on continued attention to detail. I drove home, added to my notebook, slept hard and dreamless, and the next night And the next I returned to the sundial and did my work, pouring light, counting heavier, watching the mirrors, listening for bells, following the rules that kept the border, exactly where it had been for 100 years. One shift at a time, one rule at a time, one bartender teaching the next bartender how to survive the crossing, the desert patient, the desert hungry, the desert willing to wait for the one mistake that would let it through. But not tonight. Not while we counted bottles instead of faces. Not while we followed the rules.